This chapter has contained the central argument of the book, and so, at the risk of sounding repetitive, let's summarize it as a series of 6 numbered points.
1. One of the greatest challenges to the human intellect over the centuries has been to explain how the complex, improbable appearance of design in the universe arises. 2. The natural temptation is to attribute the appearance of design to actual design itself. In the case of a man-made artifact such as a watch, the designer really was an intelligent engineer. It is tempting to apply the same logic to an eye or a wing, a spider or a person. 3. The temptation is a false one because the designer hypothesis immediately raises the larger problem of who designed the designer. The whole problem we started out with was the problem of explaining statistical improbability. It is obviously no solution to postulate something even more improbable. We need a crane, not a skyhook, for only a crane can do the business of working up gradually and plausibly from simplicity to otherwise improbable complexity. 4. The most ingenious and powerful crane so far discovered is Darwinian evolution by natural selection. Darwin and his successors have shown how living creatures, with their spectacular statistical improbability and appearance of design, have evolved by slow, gradual degrees from simple beginnings. We can now safely say that the illusion of design in living creatures is just that, an illusion. 5. We don't yet have an equivalent crane for physics. Some kind of multiverse theory could in principle do for physics the same explanatory work as Darwinism does for biology. This kind of explanation is superficially less satisfying than the biological version of Darwinism because it makes heavier demands on luck. But the anthropic principle entitles us to postulate far more luck than our limited human intuition is comfortable with. 6. We should not give up hope of a better crane arising in physics, something as powerful as Darwinism is for biology. But even in the absence of a strongly satisfying crane to match the biological one, the relatively weak cranes we have at present are, when abetted by the anthropic principle, self-evidently better than the self-defeating skyhook hypothesis of an intelligent designer.
If the argument of this chapter is accepted, the factual premise of religion, the God hypothesis, is untenable. God almost certainly does not exist.
Let's say Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins wrote a book against religion, and he has in it what he calls his master argument. The master argument. This is an argument which covers the whole ground. And it goes like this. There are complex things in the world, things that look designed. This he said in his earliest books, and he's carried it all over. He want people to take it from him. The business of evolution is to explain the appearance of design. The appearance of design. Things do look designed, but their claim is they can explain how they exist without them really being designed. Fine, that's the ballgame. Now he says, appearance of design usually involves complexity. Things that are very simple don't look designed. Only things that have certain complexity, interlocking, cooperative kind of complexity, look designed. He says, but look, how are you going to explain design? By invoking a designer? You're going to say the appearance of design is produced by a designer? But then the designer will have to be at least as complex as the thing you're trying to explain. The designer would have to have, I mean, he doesn't say all of this, he just says that as if it were obvious to every 7-year-old. Think of the designer designing it. Presumably he'll have to have a picture in his mind of the whole thing, how it works, what it's supposed to do. That means in his mind is the whole complexity of the thing, plus more natural resources and how to do it, and energy, and who knows what else. So, if you're going to explain the existence of a complex thing on the grounds that there's a designer, you're going to be stuck with a designer who's at least as complex, maybe more complex. Then you'll have to repeat it again. Who designed the designer? Oh, well, then you're going to need an even more complex designer. So if you keep pushing this, you're going to end up with an infinite regress, and you end up nowhere. Therefore, he says, it's always wrong to explain complexity by appealing to a designer. Just a wrong move. Whew. I'm not going to spend the rest of the evening on all of what's wrong with that, though we could. But as a philosopher, this isn't biology. This isn't plate tectonics, what he's talking about. This is how explanations work, what explanations do, how they function. That's plain philosophy. Philosophers have been talking about that for thousands of years. So he stepped out of his expertise. Well, philosophers have answered him. I mean, they do so with a snicker because it's so silly and childish. But they answer him as follows. Number one, you're really telling me that invoking design never works? It never works. It's never reasonable? So, if we're doing archaeology and we find cave paintings, which they tell you are 30,000 years old, beautiful, and they are beautiful. I don't know if you've seen them, and you can look at them on the internet. They are enchantingly beautiful. It's wrong to say they were painted by an intelligent designer? That's wrong? Because then you'll have to ask, who designed the designer? And to be back on an infinite, of course it's not wrong. Of course they were painted by intelligent beings. Nothing but intelligent beings makes representative art of that kind. It wasn't dripping residues from rocks or acids that created pictures of those animals. It's ridiculous. Can't always be wrong. What about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence? Started by Carl Sagan, that paradigm of atheism. You're looking for things in the universe that indicate there are other intelligent life forms. So, for example, you get coded the decimal expansion of pi to the first million places. Everybody agrees that if you found that coming in from a galaxy, that would be knockdown proof that there must be intelligent life in that galaxy. Nothing in the purely mechanical, physical world produces the decimal expansion of pi. But how? Why is that? You're telling me I have these radio waves coming in, these radios have a certain structure, and I'm inferring that they're produced by an intelligent designer. Is Dawkins telling me that I can't do that? That's wrong to do that? Everybody agrees that that's correct. So the idea that you can't describe, you can't explain complexity in organization by intelligent design is just dumb. Of course you can. Of course we do, and of course we should do. Will that leave over a question as to the identity of the designer and where he came from? Okay, it will. Okay. But so what? The first step in explaining where this came from is definitely the appropriate step. That's point number one. Point number two, you don't always, when you have a cause for something, you don't always ask for a cause for the cause. You don't always ask for an explanation of the explanation. You don't always do that. Classical theology is based on the following idea. There's a table in this room. I can ask, why is there a table in the room? Because I can tell you what the alternative is. The alternative is that there wouldn't be a table in the room. And that's perfectly possible. I know there are two possibilities, table in the room or no table in the room. And I want to know why one is right and the other one's wrong. When you ask why is something the way it is, you are required to state another way in which it could have been. And then what you're saying at least is, why is it this way rather than that way? Suppose someone says, why is Q? And you ask him, why is Q? How else could it be? What other alternative are you imagining that it should be? And he says, oh, I don't know. I'm just asking, why is it Q? Then we have a right to respond. Then you're not asking a question. The why question is always what they call a contrastive question. It's why is this rather than that? If there isn't any other alternative, then why is it the way it is? Doesn't have any purchase. Doesn't have any content. Why is 2 plus 2 4? Well, what else would you have it be? 5? 3? 27? I mean, like, what are you offering as an alternative? If something is the way it is of necessity, then it is the way it is because of itself, not because of something else. It's only when you're asking why is Q, and somebody says, Q, and not what? Oh, why is it Q and not R? Oh, okay. It's Q and not R. Presumably there's something that made it that way. Didn't get that way all by itself. But if you ask why it's Q, and the response is, but Q's got to be that way. There's no other way that it could be. Then there's no pressure to ask for what made it that way or why is it that way, because there's no other way it could be. Okay, now how does religion regard God? Does religion regard God as an accident? Does religion regard God as something which might have been and might not have been? There could, yes, be a God and not be a God, and then say, well, okay, there is a God, but there might not have been a God, so what is it that made it that there is a God? Religion doesn't have that position. Religion's position is that God's existence is necessary. There isn't any alternative. So there's no pressure whatsoever to ask, where did God come from? Maimonides says this in the Guide, and everybody else before him and after him agrees to this. Now, maybe Dawkins doesn't like that. Maybe Dawkins doesn't like the idea that something's existence could be necessary. Then fight with that. Let's hear your arguments against that. But he doesn't do that. He simply says, if there is a designer, you're going to have to ask, who made the designer? Well, excuse me. According to the religious position, which he's fighting with, he's trying to show why religion is wrong. According to the religious position, when you come to God, there isn't any alternative. If there isn't any alternative, then the question why doesn't arise. That's the second problem in his argument. The third problem in his argument is this. He says that if you have a complex thing that exists and you invoke a designer to explain where it came from, the designer will have to be at least as complex as the thing that's designed. What kind of designers do you have in mind, Richard? Physical designers? Designers that are part of our physical universe, that store information the way we store information, other things store information? Maybe you're right there, but that's not the way traditional religions think about God. Traditional religions think about God as ultimately simple. God doesn't have any structure, internal parts, organization. God is ultimately simple. And yes, complexity comes out of a source that's ultimately simple. Now maybe you don't like that. Maybe you think that it's somehow in principle, even including God, complex things can't come out of simple sources. Well then argue that. Argue that. Let's hear your arguments for that. But he doesn't present any arguments at all. This master argument that he presents is just the most obvious naivete when it comes to philosophy, and it's an argument in philosophy, and it is absolutely worthless.